Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with contractual communication, or once you are under contract, communication between the parties and how that has to happen. So as I always teach in my classes, let's go to the contract and see what the instructions say. And the instructions for communication between the parties are the buyers and the sellers, is all located under the section where it talks about notice. So in the GAR purchase and sale agreement, that is all contained in Form F201, which is the purchase and sale agreement, and that is contained in the paragraph C1 notices. I've done several videos on notices, but I just wanted to talk about it a little bit differently in terms of communication rather than notices. But the instructions for how to communicate, how the parties are to communicate with one another, is all laid out in the notices section. So in GAR Purchase and Sale Agreement F201 under paragraph C1, it talks about notices. And the very first thing it says all notices must be in writing and signed by the party giving notice. In the RE contract forms, it's under the standard terms, which is RE1, and the section is under paragraph 11. So, for example, the contract itself uses the word notice. It says something like the party shall send notice to the other party regarding whatever, such and such an issue. And what happens is you guys as the agents end up sending an email to one another. The selling agent will send an email to the listing agent regarding an issue, or the listing agent will respond to the selling agent or initiate an email to the selling agent regarding an issue. That does not constitute notice between the parties. That is not contractual communication between the parties and does not satisfy what the contract calls for and what the buyers and the sellers agreed to in the purchase and sale agreement. So again, for example, let me give you an example. Let's say that you are under contract, you're working with the buyer and the seller, everything's going along, and then all of a sudden you get information from the closing attorney that there is an issue with the title. Let's say the closing attorney lets you know that there is a gap in title, in the chain of recording of the title, or that there is a lien on title. So in practicality, what happens is the closing attorney will email or phone call one of the agents, and the agent will of course, hopefully, notify their client, and then will send an email to the other agent about the title issue. And so then the parties might seek to delay closing in order to get that resolved, or so forth and so on. Or the buyer might say, well, I want to terminate because the seller, whatever the issue is. But no notice has yet been sent. Agent to agent email communication does not satisfy the terms of what the contract requires. So let's take a look at it. So, for example, in the GAR purchase and sale agreement, under paragraph B1, it talks about, for example, the title. It says under paragraph B1B, it says buyer may examine the title and obtain a survey of the property and furnish seller with a written statement of title objections at or prior to closing. If the seller fails to or is unable to satisfy the title objections at or prior to the closing or any unilateral extension thereof, which would prevent the seller from conveying good and marketable title, then the buyer, among its other remedies, may terminate without penalty upon written notice to the seller. So what does that mean? So again, in this example, usually you'll find out, I mean, the buyer isn't the one physically examining the title, but usually it's the closing attorney that will do the title search, and then we'll contact the agent saying, hey, we have an issue with the title. And then again, this agent-to-agent email regarding these title issues, that does not satisfy, that's not written. Yes, it's written between the agents, but the notice section says, notice written communication must be done between the parties and signed by the party. So what do you do? And let's go back and look. In the GAR purchase and sale agreement, just the purchase and sale agreement alone, the word notice is used 61 times. In the RE form standard terms, notice, the term notice, is used 34 times. So it's a pretty big deal. And it's a big deal that it be done properly in order to protect your client's rights with respect to termination rights and protect under no penalty, meaning protecting their earnest money. Another example would be, for example, with the GAR COVID-19 special stipulation that they came up with. If there's going to be a delay, hopefully we're not using this anymore. Hopefully there are fewer and fewer COVID-related events that are potentially delaying closings. But nevertheless, the GAR COVID-19 special stipulation says, in the event that there's a COVID-related event resulting in the closing attorney, mortgage lender, or buyer or seller being unable to perform their respective obligations, then the closing shall be postponed until 7 days after the specific event delaying the closing has been resolved. Now, that's just a provision that is allowed for, but unless notice has been given, number one, that there is a COVID-related event, and number two, a notice to delay the closing, then you don't just act by a special stipulation that's in a purchase and sale agreement. You don't act by a provision that's in the contract without having to notify the other party, and notification in respect to a contract, the GAR and the RE forms contract as defined says it must be in writing and signed by the party, the buyer or the seller. Notice in and of itself is unilateral. So that means that the notice would have to be sent. It only needs to be signed by the party giving the notice, which is the buyer or the seller, but not agent to agent. So all of these special stipulations and the other pre-printed issues in the contract allow for or call for notification to be done. There's a lot of examples. If the buyer has not remitted the earnest money, then the holder must send notice, so forth and so on. But nevertheless, it has to be signed by the party. So again, how do you do this? Well, in the GAR purchase and sale agreement, you would use the form, and it is F816 notice. And if you use that form, you will see there's a fill in the date the notice is given, the contract, the parties' names, the property address, and you indicate if it is the buyer or the seller giving notice, and then you spell out what the notice is, and then that party signs it and dates it, as well as indicating the method of the notice. So that is that is F816 notice. In the RE contract package, you are going to use RE260 notification. It is the same thing. The date, you reference the property, there's a space to write out what the notice is, and then it is signed by the buyer or the seller. And then you can demonstrate that the party has, in fact, given written notice signed by the party. Another example is, for example, if buyer and seller are binding with a sale or lease contingency that the buyer must sell their house prior to going through with the purchase of the new home, and there's a kick-out clause, then that calls for the seller, if the seller can continue to offer the property for sale, and if they get another contract that they want to accept, they have to notify the buyer A, that in order to, in essence, affect the kick-out, they have to send notice to the buyer that they have another offer that they want to accept, and then the time clock starts ticking from that notice for whatever time frame they negotiated in that exhibit for the buyer to then send another notice back to the seller saying, yes, we are staying in contract with you, removing whatever contingency had been agreed upon to be removed, or no, we're going to terminate. But an agent, a listing agent, sending a selling agent an email saying, hey, the seller has another offer they want to accept, we're exercising the kick out. You now have whatever, 48 hours, 72 hours to either terminate or remove that contingency. That doesn't cut it. The notice would have to be signed by the seller notifying the buyer that they have another offer that they want to. And that notice form that the seller would send the buyer, notifying them that they have another offer they want to accept. Again, in the GAR contract package is F816, and in the RE forms contract package is RE260. And then there's another after that. So that notice that the seller signs and then the listing agent sends it to the selling agent, that is when the time clock starts ticking. That's when the time frame begins for whatever the parties had negotiated, either the 48 hours or the 72 hours or 36 hours, whatever time frame had been negotiated on that exhibit. But agent to agent email does not kick off that time frame. So again, I've done other video tips on notice in terms of who can accept it, methods of delivery. In other words, when is it deemed accepted? And just so you know, if it's sent by email, which is one of the methods of delivery, number one, it must be sent to the email address or fax number on the signature page of the purchase and sale agreement. And it is deemed received by the receiver when the sender can prove that they sent it. Even if the receiver has not yet opened the email, when the sender sends it, that's when it is deemed to have been received by the receiver. So that's important when you're cutting it really close in terms of contingency timeframes. But again, please be very cautious of agent-to-agent email. Now, I'm not saying you agents don't need to communicate. You absolutely need to communicate. But as far as one party notifying the other party regarding an issue, let me rephrase that, regarding communication per the contract, that must be done per the instructions of the contract, which calls for notice, which is defined as in writing and signed by the party giving the notice, and the party is either going to be the buyer or the seller. So I hope this contract tip helped you out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.